But really, we're going to talk tonight about, oh, Clementina, how are you? Good to see you. We talk about good stress and bad stress, right? And what makes something good stress and what makes something bad stress. And really, ultimately, what we're talking about when we're talking about bad stress is stress that is more than your body's able to handle, okay? And so often when we talk about stress in our modern world and in our kind of modern kind of medical system, we always tend to refer to all stress as bad stress. You know, the idea that anything stressful, seemingly for many people in our modern society, it's almost like anything stressful is something to be avoided, okay? And I'm going to try and give you guys a bit of a different perspective on that tonight, because I think there is a real role for stress in helping you become more resilient and more adaptable, and challenging you to grow and to learn and to evolve, physically, chemically, and emotionally, right? And of course, there's a limit to that. And so we're going to talk about that as well, okay? And so, typically we think about stress and we often talk about, the medical paradigm. One of my good friends, Dr. James Chestnut, who's an amazing Canadian chiropractor, and he tends to suggest that our modern medical system tends to put everything down to bad luck, bad germs, and bad genes, all right? And so if we think about that in terms of these stresses, then we might say that, bad luck might be a car accident, bad luck might be exposure to an unknown carcinogen, right? Like something that we get exposed to that is just more than our body is able to handle, and sometimes it doesn't matter how well we prepare, it doesn't matter how resilient we are, it doesn't matter how strong we are, those things are going to be more than our body's able to handle. I often use the example in practice and I say, well, look, it doesn't matter how well adjusted you are. It doesn't matter how well you've been eating, how positive you've been thinking, whatever. If you step out the front here and get hit by a bus, it's probably going to have some negative consequences for you, right? Because some things are just more than your body's able to handle. And so that can certainly happen in terms of bad luck, right? I think that can happen in terms of bad germs. Some of the traditional chiropractors would probably disagree with me on this and say that if your body's resilient enough that maybe you can deal with all germs, and I'm not necessarily sure that that's the case. I feel like there are some exceptions where, like Ebola, right? Like full-on germs that seemingly have a pretty devastating effect on pretty much everyone they come into contact with. Now, it may well be that you can go out there and find people who've had Ebola, who've dealt with it, who've been resilient enough to resist it and to stay healthy. And so that may not be 100% true. But I think, for most people, we can say that there are some germs that are just going to knock you around, right? And bad genes, right? And so we know that there are some truly genetic disorders, okay? And that's not a big percentage of what we consider to be genetic disorders, right? That where if you've got the germ, then if you've got the gene, then you're going to get that disease, right? That's like a genetic determinism, right? And so that can happen. There are cases for that. There's also a lot more cases which are not determinism. It's a genetic correlation, but not necessarily a genetic determinism. In other words, if you have a particular gene, you're more likely, you're more susceptible to getting a particular disease, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you will get it, because there's other factors at play that we're going to talk about, okay? And so if we just put everything down to bad luck, bad germs, and bad genes, there's one really important piece of the puzzle that's missing there, and that's our body's internal resistance, right? It's our body's ability to fight back. There's two sides to this equation. There's the stress that we're exposed to, and then there's our body's ability to deal with that stress, all right? And so, yes, we can. Oh, hello, Helen. How are you? Yes, we can at times mitigate those stresses, and sometimes we can, and sometimes we can't. Right? Like I said, in the case of get hit by a bus, none of us are. Hopefully, none of us are deliberately doing that. But that's something that may be unavoidable. In the case of the reason I used an unknown carcinogen was because sometimes there are carcinogens that we know of, that we're aware of, and we can consciously act to minimize our exposure to those or to chemicals in our environment or whatever it may be. However, there are no doubt many chemicals, many carcinogens that are in our environment right now that we're just not aware of. We don't know that they are a problem, and we may not know for 10, 20, 30 years time, such is the case often with many of these chemicals that cause problems. It's not till decades later down the track that we realize, okay? And so in that case, we may not be able to always determine whether we're going to get exposed to those stresses or not. But regardless of whether we are or whether we aren't, what we can control and what we can have an influence on is our internal resistance, is our body's ability to deal with those stresses. We can certainly make that better, and we can certainly make that stronger. Now, is that going to be enough? Well, that depends on the stress that we're talking about, right? And there's a whole bunch of factors that come into that, which we're going to talk about tonight. But I think it's important for us to understand that there are two sides to this equation, that we're not just passive recipients of stress, that we are active participants in this battle between the stresses and between our resistance, okay? And so obviously, you know, as I said, there's a lot we can do to minimize stresses in our life. And sometimes I think that's a good thing. Sometimes that might be a bad thing. Sometimes we go too far, okay? And I think for me, the boundary, you know, the way of determining whether that's the case or not is generally to think about it from an evolutionary perspective. You know, to think back and think, okay, well, is that stress something that we would normally have been exposed to and that our bodies should be able to deal with? Or is that more of an extraordinary stress, you know, one that perhaps our bodies haven't traditionally been exposed to, haven't evolved to be capable of dealing with or to be efficient at dealing with? And so perhaps that might be causing more problems than our body's able to manage and to be able to mitigate. So that's kind of the way I tend to think about it. And so when I think about minimizing quote unquote bad stresses, then I think about things like, you know, chemicals in the diet, yeah, or perhaps foods in the diet that our bodies wouldn't necessarily recognize from an evolutionary perspective, right? That might be processed foods, that might be really sugary foods, that might be, you know, unhealthy fats, whatever that means, you know, seed oils, those sort of things, right? So, yeah, so we want to mitigate those in our diets and minimize those as much as possible, with the idea that, you know, maybe that they are contributing to a stress load that is more than our body's able to handle. Because that's the other thing I think we need to be mindful of in terms of stress, is that it's not always just the one individual stress that causes our problems. Is that it may be a stressed load. You know, we often talk about that in terms of chemical stuff, where we talk about a toxic load. And I think we can think about that in the same way in terms of physical and emotional stresses as well. That there can be a stress load there that may be causing us a problem, as opposed to just one individual stress, okay? And so I think if you want to get that balance right, then being mindful of those stresses in your diet, you know, those toxins in your diet would be wise. You know, being mindful of what sort of chemicals are in your beauty products, what sort of chemicals are in your cleaning products, what sort of chemicals are in your gardening products. You know, it's funny, I was just talking to my good friend Kim Morrison, chatting to her on social media just before coming onto this webinar, and she's the queen of this sort of stuff, right? She has her amazing essential oil company 28 that just does beautiful products that you can use for beauty products, that you can use for cleaning around your home. Maybe not gardening yet, maybe you need to work on that one, Kimmy, but certainly, you know, chemical-free products, natural products, or at least more natural products that you can use around your body and around your home that are going to be less likely to stress your body in a way that your body is not able to handle and to deal with. All right, so I think managing those chemical stresses is really important. Obviously, looking at the physical stresses and looking at our body's movement. You know, one of the biggest physical stresses I think that we have in our modern society is actually a lack of movement. You know, the fact that our bodies don't move as much as they should. And so our sedentary lifestyles are actually often a bigger stressor than the bad, quote unquote, bad movements that we tend to think about and worry about. Now I'm just at work here and my front door has just opened. So I'm just going to double check what's going on and be right back. All right, that's okay. Just the breeze. We're all good. All right, so movement is really important. All right, and so not moving is a stress. And in fact, you know, the research, and you've probably heard me say this before, the research would now suggest that sitting is worse than smoking for your health. All right, so that lack of movement is certainly a stress, as is moving badly, right? And so a lot of the time, I think in our modern society, our movement patterns are very unnatural, right? And that might be as a result of your job, where you are required to do a repetitive task in your job And so, so you end up with some sort of repetitive strain injury, whether that be from lifting, typing, hairdressing, whatever it is that you do. Moving badly. It might also be moving badly in the gym, where we're lifting or exercising with bad technique. We might be running or walking with bad form and bad posture. We might be using machines to facilitate our exercise that are causing us to move in an unnatural way and develop an imbalance in our body. Or we might be overdoing it in terms of our exercise. Okay, I think sometimes, if hunter-gatherers were to look at the way that we exercise as modern humans, they would find it quite humorous. The lengths that we go to and the exercises that we do and the distances that we run and all of those sort of things, because really they were all about efficiency. Having said that, they had to move a lot, right? They had to move a lot, not because they wanted to, but because they had to, in order to eat, and in order to survive, in order to not get eaten. And so, I think we need to be mindful that we do need to move. Like almost anything in life, there's a bell curve when it comes to health, and I think movement is no different. Too little movement is not good. Too much movement can be not good. And somewhere in between those two is a nice sweet spot that keeps you nice and healthy and doesn't stress your body out. So physical, not moving is bad, moving too much is bad, and moving with bad technique is bad. And I think emotionally, what we see really predominantly in our society are the biggest problems, or the most, I shouldn't say the biggest problem, probably the most prevalent problems, are not necessarily about large one-off stresses, but they're often about repetitive stresses in terms of our emotional environment. We tend to be much more influenced in our modern society by recurrent stresses that affect us out of our day-to-day, year-to-year. Things like time, things like money, things like family, emotional stresses, relationships, things that we tend to stress about over a long period of time. Once again, I think the cumulative effect of that stress and the chronic nature of that stress can be more than our body's able to handle, because we have quite an efficient system of dealing with acute stress, especially, I think, acute physical stress in our bodies. We are innately sort of hunter-gatherers who are designed to deal with those sort of acute stresses that we would have exposed, and often the reference is, the saber-toothed tiger. As a result of, we either need to fight it or run away from it. And as a result of that fight or flight, we move. And when we move, it sends messages back to our brain to release dopamine and serotonin and help switch off that stress response. All right? So there's kind of a natural built-in mechanism there that works quite efficiently for acute stresses. And the real challenges we tend to have, aside from, once again, one-off massive stresses that are more than our body is able to deal with, but more often than not, the challenges we have are as a result of those chronic stresses, like I said, like time or money, being present hour after hour, day after day, year after year, without the ability to switch back off again, to have that homeostasis, to have that flux and that balance that's naturally created by our body's response to the stress, and then the de-stressing our body's naturally designed to create as a result of that. Okay, and so that's what I want to say about minimizing bad stress. Is not to say that all stress is good stress. To acknowledge that some stresses are more than our body is able to handle, and to acknowledge that the cumulative effect of chronic stresses, whether they be physical, chemical, or emotional, that are more than our bodies are able to handle, and that are perhaps not natural stresses for our body to be exposed to, can have a negative and sometimes a devastating effect on the health of our body. Okay. Having said that, I also think at the same time, stress can play a really important role in maximizing your resistance. It comes back to that idea that, almost whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger, right? That by being exposed to stress, we can actually build a stronger, more resilient body. And so once again, we come back to that same bell curve where, not enough stress can actually be bad for us. The classic examples of this, I guess, is, the kids who don't play in the dirt, who end up with, high rates of asthma and allergies and those sort of things, right? The exposure to nature and to the outdoors is actually important for us, right? But whereas, I guess if you go to the other end of the bell curve, the other extreme would be if you then just went and thought, well, that's great, I'm just going to leave my toddler out in the wild exposed to the elements. Well, then that's probably going to be too much of a good thing, right? That's going to be too much exposure. And somewhere between those two extremes, I like to think that there's a balance there in terms of how much stress you're exposed to that can provide a healthy, beneficial aspect for your body and can make your body more resilient and better able to deal with the stresses of life when they come along. All right. And so if we think about that in terms of maximizing your resistance, we can do that physically, we can do that chemically, we can do that emotionally, and we can do that neurologically, right? There are ways that we can stimulate and challenge our bodies so that we can improve our resilience and so that we're better able to deal with the environment around us. And so I want to talk about some of those because many of these have been very popular over the last, well, let's say the last decade, but particularly I reckon the last 5 years, in terms of things that you can do that can help challenge your body and help create a stronger body. All right. And so one that's definitely been popular over the last little period has been fasting. And so this is the idea that by not consuming food, you can actually allow your body to adapt and to become more resilient and to become perhaps more adaptable. All right. Because when you do fast, you're then forced to use your body's natural stores of food, which is your fat. Okay. And so by nature of doing that, you become more fat adapted. And so what that means is, for most people in a modern society, they're carb adapted. In other words, we eat so many carbs that we never need to worry about being efficient at burning fat. We're told to eat carbs, and we're told to eat carbs really regularly because we've kind of assumed that you're not going to be fat adapted and that you're going to need fuel fed into your fire all day long if you want to keep sort of moving and keep functioning. Right? The flip side to that is if you do either go really low carb, which is another, you could easily come into this, and in fact is my next point there, so we'll kind of talk about these two together. But if you go really low carb, or if you do fast, then you can actually become more fat adapted. Your body then has the option of burning fat as fuel or burning carbs as fuel, which once again is a very natural thing for your body to do. You know, naturally in a I guess particularly in sort of a more European climate as opposed to an Australian climate. But you know, if there was a period of the year, you know, a winter where there was snow and ice and all those sort of things, then that would be much harder to harvest food versus a summer where you can get out and get around and hunt and gather and do all those sort of things. And so I think there would be a very natural process there whereby in the summer there was more availability of fruits and vegetables. You're going to eat more carbs. And your body would naturally store some fat throughout that time because it knows that winter is coming and that over winter you can then naturally fast or be low carb and your body's going to adapt to that and utilize that fuel, right? So I think by fasting or going lower carb, you are going to create some more resilience in your body. Obviously, with all of these pieces of advice, I will say do them under the guidance of your healthcare practitioner, right? Make sure that you're being safe. You know, if you're a diabetic who is very reliant on a steady state of carbs and calories at the moment, then you need to be really careful about how you attempt to change that, and a whole bunch of other reasons that you want to be careful. So do this in consultation with your healthcare provider, as I always say. However, it is a way for most people who have a healthy metabolism or a healthy-ish metabolism to improve it and to create a greater resilience by improving their fat adaptability. And obviously in doing so, if you do it in a healthy way, you can actually limit the amount of fat that you're storing on your body and get some health gains and some resilience gains there as well by leaning up and creating a healthier body, putting less stress on your body as well. All right. So that would be one element. Quitting something, can be a stress for you, and so this can be a chemical stress that can be beneficial for you, right? This might be that you're going to quit sugar. You may not need to totally quit sugar, but you may quit added sugars, or you may quit processed sugars. You may quit unhealthy fats or vegetable oils. You may quit processed foods, right? You whatever it is that you want to change, you may quit alcohol, all right? Whatever it is that you want to limit and to change in your diet, that is going to be a stress for you, right? This is challenging your body. This is challenging you chemically. It's probably also challenging you physically and emotionally, okay? And so those sort of challenges can be really useful for your body in making your body healthier, making your body stronger, making your body resilient, and making your mind healthier, stronger, and more resilient as well, okay? And so, once again, this can be a good stress that you can utilize to help with your body. You can do it as a challenge. Many people will do a 7 day, a 21 day, a 30 day, a 3 month challenge, a 6 month challenge. Okay, things like the Whole30 were a really popular way of doing this. And so challenging yourself in that way, I think, is, once again, it can be challenging for you chemically. If you go into a low carb challenge, then you may get what they call the carb flu, which is that you can feel pretty crappy, especially for the first few days, as your body adapts to that lower carbohydrate intake and adapts to being able to metabolize fats or to utilize fats for energy better. And so, those sort of challenges can really knock you around chemically. They can knock you around emotionally. There can be some real emotional attachments to certain foods that can be challenging to overcome. And obviously physically, until your body gets to the stage where it is fat adapted, there may be a period there where you are feeling quite tired and lethargic and grumpy and all those sort of things as well. All right. So certainly, there are ways that you can challenge yourself from a dietary perspective. Another one that can be really popular is an elimination diet or a GAPS diet or something of that nature, all right, which once again can be a real challenge and a real stress for your body in the short term. However, can take a lot of the stress load off of your body in the long term by allowing your body to heal, by allowing your gut to heal, by giving yourself a break from whatever it is that is inflaming you. Whether that be something that's inflaming you just because it's flat out inflammatory and not designed for human consumption, or whether it's something that your body is getting inflamed by because your body's overreacting to it, because perhaps your body isn't as resilient as it could be, right? And so then we start seeing, well, there's kind of two options to that, right? One is to eliminate it totally and give your body a chance to heal. The other can be to continually expose yourself to it and to nullify that exposure effect. And both of these can be used in different times, and both of them can be an example of a stress for your body that can be actually really beneficial, right? And so hopefully you're starting to get the picture here that that constantly thinking about avoiding stress, that constantly thinking about minimizing stress isn't necessarily the right way to go in terms of our body. Often we think about it and we only think about the short term, right? And in the short term, avoiding the stress can tend to lead to us feeling better, feeling healthier, and performing better, right? However, in the long term, then sometimes avoiding the stress can make matters worse. I'm reminded of when I used to work at Bunnings, and there was a period there where they started bringing in and giving to all of the staff a back brace. And the idea was that you would put it on pretty much the entire time you were there. You would wear a back brace to help so that when you were lifting, you wouldn't injure yourself, right? It was designed to protect you from danger. The problem they quickly realized was that people who wore a back brace all day, every day at work, weren't utilizing their back muscles and ligaments, which meant that when they left work and they went to lift something, they would invariably injure themselves. All right. And so the idea that by minimizing the stress or by avoiding the stress in the short term, we were able to not have the negative consequences of that stress in the short term. But in the long term, what we did was we created a weaker, less resilient body that was actually far more susceptible to stress and susceptible to stresses that perhaps wouldn't have otherwise been a problem had we had a normal level of resilience in our body, right? And so that's kind of what we're talking about here. We're talking about increasing your resistance. We're talking about stressing your body so that you can become more resilient, okay? And obviously, physically, this is the way we often think about this. If we think about this in terms of strength training, then it kind of makes sense. That's the one I think that we get, probably the one I should have started with, because it is the one that we get, is that, if you want to build stronger muscles, then you need to stress those muscles. You need to lift heavier weights. What you're actually doing is ripping apart those muscle fibers and allowing your body to rebuild them stronger. Okay. And so really that's what we're doing with a lot of these forms of stress, right? Is that we are pulling our bodies apart, challenging our bodies, so that our bodies can be rebuilt stronger. We're building a healthier body. And so we're seeing this come in more and more physically with things like, for example, cold therapy has been one that's been very popular over the last couple of years. There's been the cold shower challenges, the ice bath challenges, and I often think about this, and I think, I live up in the Adelaide Hills, and it gets cold there in winter. not freezing. Friends from Canada who, might be -30 over there. And they say, well, getting down to 0 in the Adelaide Hills, that's not cold. But the reality is that, our houses and our clothing aren't built the way they're built in Canada. So it probably impacts on us more than perhaps it does them, or differently to it does them, certainly. But the reason I'm saying this is that I think sometimes we can try and avoid that cold at all costs. And we spend our whole time trying to rug up, trying to warm ourselves with electric blankets and hot water bottles and air conditioning cranking the entire time. And, we race from the house to the car and we, rug up and put layer upon layer if we do need to be outside for any period of time. And maybe that's doing it the wrong way. Maybe rather than do that all day and then all of a sudden decide we want to do an ice bath challenge in the morning to stress ourselves, maybe we should just worry less about the cold all day. And allow ourselves to get out into the cold environment. Maybe just go out in a t-shirt. Obviously, once again, be sensible about it. If you're feeling sick or, all that sort of stuff, right? Speak to your healthcare provider, all those sort of caveats, right? But maybe we do need to just expose ourselves to the elements a little bit more. Maybe the fact that we've created such an artificial environment around us. Once again, James Chestnut, who I mentioned earlier, he talks about humans as being animals living in captivity. Right, and when you think about it, when you think about what we've done to our environment, sometimes it does kind of encapsulate the worst of what we see at zoos and what we're trying to go away from at zoos. Right, all the zoos are trying to move back towards giving animals a more natural environment, whereas it seems that our zoos, workplaces, schools, those sort of things, seem to be heading the other way and creating less and less natural environments all the time. So maybe we need to expose ourselves to the elements of cold. Maybe we need to expose ourselves to the elements of heat. Maybe we need to just leave the air conditioner off. Maybe we should use a blanket instead of a hot water bottle so we're not getting that EMF radiation. Maybe we should just move instead of sitting still to get warmer, right? I think there's something to be said for that, that we have created these very sterile, artificial environments in so many ways. Like I said, not just in terms of germs, as we mentioned earlier, but in terms of temperatures, in terms of floor surfaces, in terms of, all of the aspects of our environment that are so mundane, so consistent, so same, that we're not getting the differentiation that allows us to be more resilient and to allow us to have a diversity of challenges that we can meet in our day-to-day life, okay? Once again, people can do this with high-intensity interval training. That's a popular way of stressing your body out, of challenging many different systems in your body, right? So many of you will know that I am a CrossFitter, and I love CrossFit because CrossFit does consciously challenge all of the different aspects of fitness. It challenges your strength, it challenges your cardiovascular fitness, it challenges your mobility, it challenges your stamina, it challenges your power. It's intentionally designed to challenge all of the different systems in your body. And sometimes that'll be in the form of a 2-minute exercise. Sometimes it'll be in the form of a 1-hour exercise and all of the combinations in between. Because once again, it's deliberately designed to be diverse and varied. And I love that because I feel like that is a great way to build physical resilience in my body. And I know that one of the things I probably love more about CrossFit than anything is I know that it builds mental resilience as well. And I appreciate that, not just when I'm at CrossFit, but throughout the rest of my day and the rest of my week as well. All right. And so strength training, as I said, cardio, mobility work, right? Like working on your mobility and your range of motion is a way to stress your body out, but stress your body in a positive way that allows you to be stronger and more resilient and more capable. And often that's the way I think about it. Capability, I think, is a great sentence and a great word to use here. What do you need to do to create a more capable body? What do you need to do to create a more capable mind? What do you need to do to create a more capable biochemistry? Right? How can you challenge your body so that it becomes more and more capable? All right. And so, as I said, mobility is part of that. Air conditioning, as I mentioned earlier, switch off the air conditioning. Let your body be exposed to the elements a little bit more, and get the benefits of that increased adaptive range that your body then has as a result of being continually exposed to different environments rather than just the same environment over and over. Once again, allow your body to experience the seasons, right? Just as we said with food and how the foods change over the seasons, so the temperature changes over the seasons. And by allowing yourself to go through that natural flux and that natural cycle, I think you do maintain a degree of resilience and capability to be able to deal with those different scenarios. We went for a bushwalk on Tuesday afternoon, which was wonderful. And we got many of these resilient experiences because we did about 6Ks, so we covered a decent amount of ground. It was very uneven ground. It was up and down, so we got a good exercise. It's been raining a lot in Adelaide, so we had to clamber over a couple of creeks, and we had to actually lift some quite heavy posts and fallen trees to lay them across the creek so that we could actually get across, because the streams and the crossings were a lot higher than they would usually be. And it was cold, and so we were able to experience that cold and enjoy that cold air and see our breath and all those sort of things. And then as we got towards the end, because it took us about 3 hours, it was starting to get dark, and so then we were able to allow our eyes to adjust to darkness and to see once again that resilience, that capability of our body to deal with another challenge. And what we noticed was that when we tried to artificially improve that and change that by turning on a torch, then all of a sudden it made it worse, because you could see what was going on in front of the torch, but your ability to see anything outside of that torch range was next to none, right? So the torch kind of worked for one person but made it worse for everybody else. And so once again, it's putting yourself in a position where your body needs to adapt and to evolve and to get stronger and more resilient and more capable and to increase its adaptive range. I think is a really, really healthy thing to do. So uneven ground definitely comes into that. I think our modern world is just all hard, flat surfaces, right? Whether that's the floor here in the practice, whether that's the car park or the road or the footpath outside, or tragically, even many of our walking trails through the Adelaide Hills, they're now paving them or bituminizing them. And I think that's a travesty. I think I get why they do it, because they don't want people falling or suing them, or, they want to make it more accessible, I understand, for people who do have challenges. And I get that too. But there's also a real benefit, I think, to being exposed to uneven ground. Once again, as long as you are not for example, a diabetic neuropathy patient who can't feel what's going on with your feet, then that uneven ground might not be good for you. But for most people, being exposed to that uneven ground, firing the muscles in their feet, helping to maintain the arches in their feet, stimulating their proprioceptors in their feet, which helps to de-stress their brains, that stress is actually really, really healthy for you. And it builds up the strength in the muscles in your feet, and it builds up the strength in the ligaments in your ankles, so that you're less likely to get injured later. And this is often the case with these things, these stresses that we're talking about, especially the physical stresses, is that we can do studies on this and say that, well, if we send people out on this uneven ground, they're more likely to get injured. And that's true. However, that's only in the short term. And what I think you'd find is if we looked at those people over the longer term, these people would then actually become less likely to get injured, because they're building up their muscular strength, they're building up their ligamentous strength, they're putting resistance through their bones, they're building a stronger, more resilient body. And so this is where, once again, I see this with CrossFit. People always talk about CrossFit being an injury risk and dangerous and all these sort of things. And I kind of say, yeah, it kind of is in the short term. However, if you keep doing it consistently and carefully over a period of time, you can actually build up a much higher degree of resilience, to the point where I feel like, yes, maybe I still am a slightly higher risk of injuring myself when I do CrossFit, because I push myself to the limit and do all these weird, crazy movements and all those sort of things. However, the degree that I increase my risk of injuring myself whilst doing CrossFit is infinitesimal compared to the degree that I decrease my risk of injuring myself in every other facet of my life, right? Because all of a sudden, everything else I do day to day, week to week, whether it is being down in Morialta, lifting logs across a creek to try and create a crossing, right? It's like my body is strong enough to do it, and I'm not at risk of getting injured when I do it, because I've built that resilience, I've built that adaptive capability by stressing my body out to a much higher degree in the CrossFit gym, right? And so uneven ground, I think, is a big one. Just getting outdoors, I think, is a big one. Being exposed to the elements, I think is a great one in terms of stressing your body in a huge variety of ways. As I said, when we did it, it was the ground, it was the air, it was the temperature, it was the slippery surfaces, it was the lugging the logs, it was the dark, all of those things, pollens, dirt, bugs, whatever it may be, right? You're going to stress your body out by spending time outdoors in all wonderful ways. And I would encourage you to do that. And then the final one I've got here in terms of physical stuff is travel. Right? Getting yourself out of your comfort zone, I think is very healthy for you and very healthy for your body. Once again, in terms of broadening your mind, increasing your adaptive range, increasing your capabilities as an individual, and just learning along the way. All right. So these are all ways I think that physically you can stress yourself in order to increase your resilience and increase your adaptive range. And then when it comes to mental, emotional stuff, things like meditation, and I put meditation down as a stress, and people will probably find that strange, but I do think that it can be quite challenging for many, many people. And so that can be seen as a challenge and a stress. It's two different names for the same thing. Maybe different degrees of difficulty. People would tend to think of a stress as being a higher degree of difficulty and perhaps a challenge being a lesser, but really they're two different names for the same thing. And for many people, something like meditation can be quite challenging. However, the challenge of doing it is what allows you to broaden your adaptive range in terms of your mind, right? It enables you to deal with more stressful situations as you go through the rest of your life. So I'd encourage you to play with things like meditation or mindfulness, gratitude, positivity, right? The act of doing these things consistently on a regular basis can be quite challenging. However, the benefits far outweigh the risks, right? The benefit of doing that consistently and the increased resilience and the increased adaptive range you then have as you take that stronger, more resilient mind into the rest of your life. Once again, the benefits obviously far outweigh the risks. Something like a social media detox would be a great way to challenge your mind. And once again, I think would have many significant benefits for you if you could spend a week or a day or a month, whatever it may be, away from social media. I think you'll find that there's a real benefit there for you. Something like therapy, okay? Once again, it can be very challenging to delve into those emotions, to delve into your present, to delve into your past, and to really sort of analyze what's going on. And once again, very, very stressful emotionally in the time. But the lessons you learn from going into that stress can help make you so much more resilient in the rest of your life and deal with the rest of the stresses that you meet in your life in a much healthier, much stronger, much more stoic way. Okay. Similarly, things like forgiveness can be a really hard thing to do. You only do forgiveness for yourself. It's not for the other person. It's for you. And the benefits of forgiving that other person are all for you. But it can be really hard to do. It can be a really hard process to go through. It can be a really stressful process to go through. But the degree of resilience and the degree of adaptive range that you can gain from doing that, once again, I think far outweighs the stress that you go through to build it. Okay, we know with things like brain training now is becoming very popular. Okay, as a way of building a stronger brain, building a more resilient brain, more resistant to the effects of aging. And I think often when we talk about the effects of aging, what we're talking about are the effects of dysfunctioning over time. This is something I often talk about in practice, is that often what we put down to aging is not really aging at all. I think the normal aging process is actually very slow and very healthy. I think it was Descartes said that life should be like a candle. It should burn brightly right throughout. And then right towards the end, it flickers once or twice and then goes out. I think that's the way our bodies should age. That's normal, is that we stay healthy and vibrant for a very long period of time. And then the end comes more suddenly. I think what we see in our modern society is a deterioration from a very early age, often from teens, 20s, 30s. We see people starting to degenerate, starting to get wear and tear in their spine, as I see in practice all the time, but starting to deteriorate physically, mentally, and emotionally as a result of the way that they look or the way they don't look after their body physically, chemically, and emotionally. And so once again, coming back to brain training, I like to think that what we're doing there is just allowing for we're not necessarily resisting aging, but what we are resisting is premature aging and premature dysfunction. And so we're maintaining that capability of our brain. We're maintaining our ability, our adaptability, our presence in our brain to be able to meet the challenges of the world around us for as long as possible. I remember reading about hunter-gatherer tribes where you weren't able to be in their tribal council unless you were 100 years old. Right? And what that means is not only were they living healthily to 100 years old, but they were mentally capable enough to run the whole lot at 100 years old. And I think there'd be very few in our society who make it to 100 years old, and if they do, who have the mental capacity to be leaders in our society at 100 years old. And I think that's a sad thing. And that's something that we can try and change by stressing our brains, by doing things like brain training, or playing games, or learning sports, or learning languages, or learning new instruments, whatever it may be. I think we can really create a resistance within our bodies by stressing ourselves out in those ways. Okay, and so that's really, I guess, what I wanted to talk to you guys about tonight. It was just about changing the conversation about stress. Okay, I'd love to hear from you guys if you've got any questions about this. So put them in the chat as I sort of round things up here, and I'll answer them before I finish. But as I said, what I really wanted to do tonight was just change the conversation around stress. That this idea that we have in our modern society, I think especially in the Western world, that we want to just always try and minimize stress. We want to have a stress-free life. We want to have, we want to stress less. May not be necessarily the way to go. Maybe the stress that we've got in our lives isn't the problem. Maybe our body's ability to deal with that stress is the problem. And maybe the answer to that is actually adding in a little bit more stress into our lives in the right way, at the right time, at the appropriate dose, so that we can, maybe not all at once, maybe it's step-by-step introduction, right? Like a staggered approach. Maybe we can intentionally incorporate some stress into our lives. Maybe we can intentionally build up our resilience physically, chemically, and emotionally. And maybe by doing that in a controlled way, in a controlled environment, we can then build up a stronger, more resilient body, so that when we do go out into the wide world, we are more resilient, we are more capable, which I think is a fun thing to be. I like, to be capable enough to say yes to things in life, is one of my biggest goals. When something fun comes along, whether that's with my mates, whether that's with my family, whether it's just by myself, I want to be able to say yes, and I want to be able to do it, and I want to be able to take on a challenge, whatever that may be. Much like we did on Tuesday afternoon going on our hike. And so, maybe we need to start being conscious about how we can introduce these stresses in a controlled way, in a controlled environment, to build up our resistance, to build up our adaptive range, so that we can be more capable humans. And as Fred Barge, who is a chiropractic philosopher, I'm looking across here because I've got his book right here. He has a book called A Life Without Fear. With the idea being that, if we can build up our body's resistance, then we don't need to be so fearful of the world around us all the time. We can actually be capable and confident to go out into the world and to play and to achieve and to strive and to take on challenges head on, confident that we are capable of dealing with it and thriving through it, rather than peeling back and hiding and putting ourselves in a bubble and trying to avoid stress wherever possible. So hopefully that makes sense to you guys. Clementina says, interesting, reminding us of the importance of stress. Absolutely. And, once again, it cuts both ways, I think, is the important thing to remember. Yes, we can minimize the bad stress. And yes, we can figure out how to not, overly stress our bodies. But at the same time, I think we don't want to put ourselves into a bubble. We want to create a resilient body so that we can take on the world around us, and so that we're not, shivering in the corner, but we're striving out into the world and enjoying it and having fun and, living life. So thank you guys. Thank you, Steffi. I'm glad you guys enjoyed it. I'll look forward to, I'll look forward to chatting to you guys in a workshop again next month. But actually next month there won't be a workshop because I'm going to be in Croatia. I mentioned travel earlier. Croatia. I'm not going to be in Croatia. Steph and I went to Croatia for a honeymoon. I'm going to be in Vietnam which is going to be awesome, getting a bit of warmth in the middle of winter. And so we're going to go there and take ourselves outside of our comfort zone with 3 kids in tow, and see what sort of fun adventures and challenges we can have there, and how we can stress ourselves out there, but also how we can use the adaptability we've developed with our healthy lifestyles, and enjoy our capability, coercing, heading across a different country and experiencing a different culture. So there won't be a workshop next month, but there will be another one the month after. I haven't picked a topic for it yet, so if there's something you want to pick, make sure you head into my Healthy Lifestyle Choices group and let me know. Otherwise, for now, I'm going to love you guys and leave you. Have a wonderful evening. I'm going to head off to get a little bit more work done while I watch the cricket, and I'll speak to you guys not next month, but actually the month after. Thank you.